Hi, I'm Srini Rao, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to another Flashback Friday episode of A Productive Conversation. As you heard, Srinivas Rao, or Srini, is joining us on this episode. I think we can go by Srini at this point. We've talked a number of times over the years, but the last time he actually appeared on the podcast was October of 2014. So we're like 10 years ago. And as we discussed during this update segment, which is rather lengthy, it could have been an interview on its own. We dive into what he's been up to since then, and then we go into our original conversation that we had back in October of 2014. It's really a fascinating study on what Srini has done and the evolution of not just his content, but also, what he's been working on. And he's always been a creative, and he's always been somebody who's explored, and there's no greater evidence of that you can check out right now than listening to this episode. So I'm not going to spend any more time kind of getting into that. So we're just going to get right into the conversation. First off, we'll start with the updated conversation that literally took place only a couple of weeks ago. The audio, if it's a bit weird, is because he's got a lot going on. So there might have been some background noise. And I was also in a hotel room in Los Angeles, getting ready to go to the second Brain Summit hosted by Tiago Forte and his team. So we were both kind of in the midst of stuff, but I wanted to bring this to you as a special sort of companion piece to this Flashback Friday episode. So we'll start there. Then we'll go right into the flashback episode from October of 2014. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Srini Rao. Enjoy.
Srini, you're a busy guy. We got lots going on. I'm in LA at the second Brain Summit while we're doing this. You've got some stuff going on. I just wanted to get a quick update before we go to this Flashback Friday episode about what's been going on in your world. It's been like, I think, a decade since we actually had you on the show. It's been a long time. We've chatted, but it's been a while. So what's been going on?
Well, most of my work right now has centered, funny, you're going to the second Brain Summit. I have spent the better part of the year working on, I built a YouTube channel called Maximize Your Output, which focuses on tutorials for MEM, but that's also led into this incredibly deep dive into all things AI. Like exploring the intersections of AI and creativity in a way that I don't think most people are, because I think that most people, when we think of AI, are seeing a tool rather than a creative thought partner. And I think that's a misguided and short-sighted approach, because they're actually really undervaluing the power of AI. Like, AI can do a lot of ththings, but the thing is that it's about really understanding what AI does well and what humans do well, and understanding that, like, there are these sort of I ended up writing this entire ebook about this. There's an article on Medium about it called "Where Human AI Execution Meets Human Creativity," right? Because the reality is, it's funny when you think about it from the productivity standpoint. Like, a lot of the things that we spend our time on, most execution aspects of creativity and in general knowledge work will be commodities very soon. They won't matter as much because almost all of them can be fully, not even just automated, orchestrated. Like, I'm literally in the process building a tool right now that is almost done. Literally, I was just adding the final bits of it today. Like, I was hacking away at code yesterday, but this thing will allow you to basically generate an entire ebook completely with your voice, and it's layered on top of Adobe Cloud products. So, like, where it started is, I've been doing these custom children's books for my nephew. Basically, I started keeping track of his vocabulary sometime in November last year, and just on a whim, I wanted to see what my note-taking app would come up with. I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, I have every transcript I've ever, had access to, and every piece of information I've ever accumulated. And I was like, oh, you know what? I was like, we have his word list. I was like, I just interviewed this guy named Ben Gutman about his book. He mentioned Dr. Seuss. I was like, you know what? Do this. Take the synopsis that you gave me, use my nephew's word list, and then make it rhyme like Dr. Seuss. So that became the first custom children's book. And in the 6 months since, the AI has gotten so good that unfortunately they're all packed up. I can show you a photo if you want. I can screen share.
We can put a link to in the show notes. Do you have it available, see
I do.
online? We'll link to it in the show notes. Really, really quickly though, what's interesting about all of this is this intersection of creativity and AI, in that a lot of creatives, I think one of the things it can do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and again, we've got a limited amount of time, is because you've got a lot of content, just like me, anyone who's been doing stuff, creators typically get this idea like, I've already put it out there, therefore I must make something new. This allows you to kind of short circuit that mindset, right?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you an ability to repurpose and repackage content at scale in a way that you never could before. So, I mean, the truth is that, like, the funny thing is that everything about AI, like, to effectively use AI, you almost have to know nothing about AI. You have to learn, it almost all the essential skills that make you successful in the age of AI have nothing to do with AI.
Yeah.
They're the skills that make you good at being human. I mean, for me, the big thing has been, because I'm an interviewer, I know how to guide an AI conversation. Like, the article I wrote took, I think, 3 weeks, 3 threads, upwards of 1,000 prompts and responses. Because what most people will do is they'll stop at the very first output and then they'll conclude that AI sucks. And it's like, no, I'm like, you're expecting it to do all the work. That's the problem here. You're not supposed to, you can't expect, like, because what it's going to do is it's going to draw from general knowledge, right? This takes us into a lot of second brain concepts where AI is very good at divergence and humans are very good at convergence. So the existing knowledge you have, like for somebody like me, people jokingly call me the AI whisperer because I can bring, insights from thousands of interviews. I have a referential encyclopedia in my brain that is massive. So I don't just depend on what it knows. I'm able to say, okay, do this. So I'll give you an example. So for example, say, okay, here's a title for a blog post. I was like, do this. Take the concepts from Made to Stick. Give me 25 variations, rank them on scores 1 to 5, incorporate every concept in the Made to Stick principles, formulas, you make it formulaic, and then rank them and explain why you chose each one and explain how it hits the triggers. The thing with, social science books like Made to Stick is they're brilliant concepts. In theory, they're very hard to put into practice. AI can actually help you do that in a way that we never been able to before. So I'll literally, but the thing is that there's no way you would know to even think to do that if you hadn't read Made to Stick to begin with. Right. So a lot of it is your existing knowledge matters so much more now. I have this sort of idea, what I call the theory of personal knowledge capital. So if you look at AI, right, why are big companies good at AI? Because they have data, tons of it. And so that's why when you feel like Facebook is paying attention to you, it's because Facebook does pay attention to everything you do. They're tracking everything. They have every piece of information about you that, probably more than the FBI or CIA does. So the thing is that they're able to do eerily, curated content. But the thing is, for an individual, what the equivalent of that data is what I call personal knowledge capital. It's all the knowledge you've acquired, like the knowledge you've consumed, your specialized insights from that knowledge, as well as a combination of new ideas. Because if you think about it, almost all our ideas are built on other people's ideas anyways, right? So the thing is, the more you have in terms of book notes, in terms of transcripts, I mean, I have a gold mine for this. It's just, I'm very fortunate in that, like, I just have such a massive body of work to draw from already that I'm not even about I'm not like, right. I actually think that it actually makes it possible to create a lot of new things that we've never been able to before using our existing content. It just allows us to repackage and repurpose in a way we never could before. But the real thing that AI does more than anything is that it makes a division of labor at scale accessible to the masses, right? Because if you think about foundational economic theory, Adam Smith said division of labor increases output. Like, we all know that. But labor has been traditionally very expensive. It's prohibitive. It's one of those resources. So now what you're doing is you're replacing all the places where you might have needed to hire humans. So I can show you the ebook I designed was breathtaking. And almost all of it, was done largely, the layout ideas and a lot of it came from AI, like to the point where I got, where I was like, okay, this even is taking too long. I'm like, how do we streamline this even more, to the point where I was like, oh my God, I'm like, I can build this whole thing with nothing but APIs. So literally within the next day or two, I'll have an interface built that runs solely through voice. And I tell it what I want to do, and it lays out a PDF ebook in seconds. And that's like the version 1.0 of this. It's going to be like a full blown command center. So it can basically analyze your contents of your inbox. Like, you literally will never check an email again. It'll write emails for you. It'll do everything. And the thing is, you will still be involved. And see, I think the thing that people are missing is that they think that AI means humans don't need to be involved at all. And yeah, that's possible, but you ought to be careful where. In creative work, the other big mistake, I think, is people assume that just because AI is here, like, it negates the need for all the things that have made creators successful in the past. So there's this difference between AI generated and AI enhanced content, in my mind, right? AI generated basically stops at the first output. AI enhanced content is actually still basically going to leverage everything that you and I have talked about for years, that people like Ryan Holiday and Cal Newport have talked about. That's deep work. Like, think about how many people do you know who will sit through hours and hours of a conversation with ChatGPT, like thousands of prompts over 3 weeks, to the point where I had to keep starting new threads because they kept breaking. They got so long they wouldn't work anymore. So that's not common, because what most people do is they'll stop at the beginning. So what you have is there's a term that I coined called the recursive creativity loop. which is like 6 stages, right? It's like input, exploration, feedback. So what happens is humans still play an integral role in all of this, but the effort is being redistributed to the ideation and refinement and development of the ideas. To execute becomes a lot faster, which means the execution becomes a commodity because anybody can execute. But the thing is, it's an ability to execute in a way that actually produces value, because any moron can go into any AI image generator and generate an image of this, but that's not really useful. It's like, how are you going to put all of this together? So like, if you want, if I can share my screen, I can kind of show you. So, this is like the very beginning of, we started this about 9 months ago, like just playing with it. And I mean, if you look at this, these are like customized children's books that I made specifically for my nephew, and I did it all using AI. Yeah, they don't look like something that somebody threw together.
No, they look really good.
Yeah. And so the thing is that takes a certain kind of thinking, which takes us into this idea of recursive creativity. So like the job of humans becomes sort of 3 roles, right? Guides, critics, and curators. So you have to guide the AI with your initial input. You have to be wise enough to criticize its output and tell the AI, okay, this doesn't work, but this is where your convergent thinking comes in, right? So then you have sort of this, exploration phase where so much of this, basically what ends up happening is you spend a lot of time refining and rethinking ideas for clarity's sake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where what the AI does is it actually pulls out latent ideas that are percolating that you actually don't know how to access. Subconsciously, they've always been there, right? You just articulate them. So like even the what we call the recursive creativity loop was something that came out of this, 3-week conversation. And then, when we're trying to figure out how do you understand, human and AI strengths, like what I realized is I explained to it, I said, look, like the thing is, the way we're explaining this isn't going to grok for people. What we need is a 4-quadrant model. Because how do I know that? Because I remember that from some interview that somebody on the podcast told me about. They had a 4-quadrant model for something. And I was like, okay, if you put something in a 4-quadrant model, so you have these 4 quadrants, right? Human weaknesses and AI weaknesses, which is the danger zone where both of those the thing you're doing. Then you have AI strengths and human weaknesses, which is like processing large volumes of data. Then you have human strengths and AI weaknesses, which is like creativity, emotional intelligence. Like what AI is not good at is context. It lacks contextual awareness. And so what you're doing when you're going through this recursive loop is you're increasing its contextual awareness. Like every time you speak to it and more you add data, the more its contextual awareness grows. It's incompetent when it comes to context. Everybody knows that it loses context in the process of even, a conversation. So I told it, I was like, okay, well, if you're losing context, let's do something else. I'm going to give you 10 of my podcast transcripts. Let's have you analyze them, not for content of the transcripts, so that you can understand how to think more like a human, and then we'll just bake those into your instructions. But here's the thing: most people don't think like this, right? I think, at layers, because what I've spent my last 10 years doing, or 13 years doing, is literally peeling back layers on humans. And I'm trying to basically do that with AI. And the funny thing is, the more that you talk to AI like you talk to a human, the better the results get. The other thing, this is probably going to be the most useful thing that somebody can implement right away.
Okay.
When I wasn't getting the responses that I wanted out of AI, the thing I realized was, I'm an interviewer. You know what? I basically said, you know what? You're not understanding what I'm saying. So why don't we do this? You ask the questions instead of me asking you the questions. You ask the questions, I'll answer them. And you wouldn't believe what that does, because what that does is it basically helps you not only give the AI the contextual awareness it needs, but also communicate with it in a way that it can actually comprehend it. Because I've seen friends who get frustrated and I'm like, you sound like an idiot. I couldn't understand what you're saying, and I'm human. And I think that there's this sort of idea, this myth that, oh, this is just magical. It'll do whatever I ask it to. And
yeah.
The thing is that, there are things that are magical that you can do. Like, I'll send you the demo that, I put together for Straight, which is literally going to basically, what I realized, I was going back and forth between multiple tools, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I need a way. I just asked it, why is there no AI to AI communication layer? And it actually suggested, what you could do is this, where you connect, because I was like basically having ChatGPT writing a story, having ChatGPT convert that story into illustration prompts, then putting those illustration prompts into my image generator. And then I was like, okay, let's put this into a database and shortcut it. And then it was like, we could shortcut this even more so that you never even have to open the image generator or the database. All you have to do is basically cut and paste the story, and everything goes in seconds from there. To basically, you go through it, it generates the title pages, it asks you for revisions, and then it stores all the records in Airtable, exports all the files to Dropbox. And then when it's done, you'll have a PDF ebook at the end of it. Now, I did this, keep in mind, I built this for my own use, but
sure,
The thing is that this is like literally the like minimum viable version of this. Like the next version, you're going to be able to do a lot more customizations, like the very things that you'll have a personal version of this. This is specifically the version I created for design. And it's a very elementary version that right now just generates images. Eventually, it's going to be able to do really comprehensive layouts. Because you think about Adobe tools, right? They're really powerful, but they're very difficult to use. And that's been one of their big challenges. And I did a lot of the stuff you saw all in InDesign, and InDesign is a nightmare to use. Like if you don't, you have to like, and part of it was there's so many different images and stuff. So I ended up having ChatGPT write scripts for me to do processes really fast. But I realized what I was doing was automating individual tasks. And so we came up with a sort of concept of orchestration instead of automation, where orchestration basically chains together entire workflows where the human just guides the whole thing with a few prompts. So like as of right now, the generator can basically help you take an entire story. It can help you write the story if you want, and it'll generate all the images, store those images in Dropbox. The very last thing that I got stuck on yesterday and today was getting it to base, like by tomorrow, hopefully what it'll do is you'll see a link that says, here's your PDF ebook, go ahead and download it. So
man, we're gonna have to have a deeper conversation about this for sure.
Trust me, I know way more than most people do about AI than most people even realize. Partially because like I did it as a practitioner, right? And my focus has never been on my focus early on was on like the process optimization. I realized that was a complete, like, it was basically it's like driving a Ferrari in a school district. Like, why would you do that? Like,
right. No, it's, so we'll have you back on the show for sure to dive deeper into this, but where can people keep up with this right now before we dive into our flashback?
If you go to the Unmistakable Creative blog, the most recent blog post is, and it's also on Medium, my latest article, but there's an ebook version of it. It's basically called Where Human Creativity Meets AI Execution. And so it's lengthy, keep in mind, it's a very long read. But the idea is, like, I explained the economic theory behind it, because you have to understand the economics behind this to really see what's possible. Because once you see it through an economics lens, like a foundational economic theory lens, then you start to see it very differently. The thing is, I think people are too caught up in like, how do I use this thing? What prompts do I write? None of that really matters. Like it matters. You have to be an effective communicator. There's no question, right? Your ability to communicate the thing. And believe it or not, of all the people who've taught me more about AI, there's nobody who's taught me more about it than my nephew, who's about to turn 2, because it like communicating with AI is like learning to interact with a toddler. It's one of those things where, and my nephew is smarter than ChatGPT for sure. Most toddlers are. Because one of the things that you got to realize is that this is where the whole human versus AI debate falls apart. Right. Go back to the Matrix, right? If you remember in the Matrix, one of the things that Morpheus tells Neo is that every person who's gone up against an agent has died. People have entire clips and hit nothing but air. But he says, where they have failed, you'll succeed. And when Neo says why, he said because he's like, they are living in a world that is bound by rules.
So Srini, thanks for taking the time, buddy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So now that we've gotten an update as to what Srini has been up to, let's revisit our first ever recorded conversation. Here it is. My conversation from a long, long time ago with Srini Rao. Enjoy. Srini, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. Always happy to chat with you.
See, now we've never actually been able to record a conversation with us before that's been published because of just Skype issues and all that stuff. But we had a chance to chat recently at the podcast movement in Dallas, Texas, and that was awesome. We kind of got to hang out and really not within any session. we were chatting at dinner and at the bar and stuff like that. So it was really cool to actually get a chance to just chat outside of the element. You know what I mean? But I want to talk to you a little bit today about we were chatting a little bit before about the idea of reaching like really lofty goals and just taking things to the next level. And one of the things that I was saying is that I was watching Monday Night Football with a friend of mine, a screenwriter friend who, oddly enough, connected with me through my podcast years ago, and we've just been hanging out ever since. And we went and watched Monday Night Football, and the Jets were playing the Bears. I'm not a fan of either team, but every time I see the Jets play, I think of Gary Vaynerchuk and his goal to like own the Jets. That's his it's in everything he does has a little bit to do with that goal at the end game is like, I want to own the Jets. And I'm seeing what you're doing with your work with the Unmistakable Creative and the Instigator experience and all that stuff. And and then the book, which got Glenn Beck's attention. And I want to ask you a little bit about, like, what is that big goal? Did you have that big goal, and is everything kind of working towards that? And if you do, like, how often have you like sort of evolved or adjusted that goal to meet, your next expectation, or maybe probably more your expectation than the expectation of others, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if you asked me last year, my big goal was Instigator. It was like, this is it. Everything is about making this a reality, this crazy idea on a piece of paper. And when it manifested, suddenly I was like, I did it. And what's weird about that is what happened was there was this huge empty void, like a space in my life right after it was done. And I didn't deal very well with it. It was actually tough. Because somebody told me the other day, it's like Olympic athletes, right? They train and train and train and they get their gold medal, and then suddenly you wake up in the morning and you don't really have this sense of purpose and mission anymore. And that's a really, really scary place to be, because when something consumes your life like that, and when something is such a deep and meaningful part of your life, having it end, which it will, if you accomplish the goal, is really weird, because we forget that the process of accomplishing the goal in and of itself is this very beautiful, rewarding experience. And as much as I jokingly called the Instigator the wedding without the wife at the end of it, the process of putting it together was one of the funnest things ever. I miss that time so much. And, I think it's interesting because the goal for me keeps evolving. It changes, and Sean Achor talks about this in his research as a happiness researcher. He said, when you achieve a certain level of success, your brain changes the goalpost for what success looks like. I mean, to do everything that we've done in this year, it was kind of like, those were all dreams last year. And yet mentally, I was in a much more, solid state of mind when we hadn't accomplished all these things. And now, like, when I look at what's ahead, it's daunting but exciting. And I think about sort of, big goals keep evolving. They absolutely do. And they're probably
versioning too, right? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Totally.
I wrote about this, like the idea of versioning. Like the evolving is the process along the way, but the versioning is like, okay, I'm going to make this turn now. I'm going to go this way instead of that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I always say, every spot that you're standing on in a room, the view changes. So you see things that you didn't see before. Like I couldn't have seen bringing on Gene Powell. Like I couldn't see that we were going to need to expand our team to get to this next level of mission and purpose and message. And that to me is how these big goals work. I think that you take steps in the direction of them, and those steps are little goals that ultimately lead you there. And of course, as you take those steps, the goal evolves. 5 years ago, we were just a podcast, and now we're building an online media company, which is a whole different animal to approach it as. I mean, really, if you think about sort of going from plugging in a microphone into a laptop to a best-selling book, 60-person event, speaking on stage. I mean, nobody would have predicted or planned any of those things, but we got there because I always sort of had the compass pointed north, not knowing exactly what north would look like, if that makes any sense.
No, totally. It's funny. We were chatting just before we started recording about how I'm actually bringing on somebody to kind of help me through my own development of productivityist, because I'm looking at all the projects and I finally hit this point where I'm like, I can't do this by myself anymore. And it's not just going to be a virtual assistant that can help me, which I've used, and I continue to use virtual assistants, but I need somebody that is in the room. Or, and I'm going to, masterminding is one thing, but I need somebody that's going to give me a bit of a shake every once in a while to go, either here's how we do this, or this isn't something we should do right now, or this isn't something we should do at all. Remember what the larger goal is, the larger vision, because you can get caught up, right?
Yeah, totally. And, I think you're right about meeting somebody in the room. I mean, one to gut check you, one to keep you in check at moments. But also, there's something to be said for having a support system. Because if you look at any of these bigger, massive missions, even Gary Vaynerchuk, right? There's hundreds of people behind VaynerMedia that help enable the possibility of reaching that goal. And the other thing is, it's not just a support system that to me is in place from a tactical perspective, but I think you need a support system even from an emotional perspective, because what we've chosen to do is incredibly hard work. It requires an ability to deal with an insane amount of uncertainty an ability to conquer your own self-doubt, an ability to keep going in moments when it seems like it's all just falling apart. And sometimes the support system or the other person in place makes that whole process so much easier as opposed to trying to go it on your own. I mean, the failure rate for people who try to do everything on their own is pretty high. And the statistics, really indicate that. And that's one of the big lessons that we learned this year, was that we needed a team, because what we saw, what happened post Instigator, was that I couldn't maintain the momentum on my own because I was burned.
Oh, yeah, you crash hard. I mean, when I was doing the film festival here in Victoria, or when I was producing comedy shows, when a show was over, you were done. Like, there was a buzz there, and that initial buzz at the end of the event can sustain you for a bit, but you need a break. You need to step back and just get out of your own way for a little while, because you're not going to be much good to anybody, let alone yourself, right after something like that.
Yeah, there's also the buzz, but there's also the argument for having something to fill the void, right? Because the buzz is going to wear off, like you said, and you need something to pour yourself into right away. And I didn't quite have that in place. Like, I didn't plan very well for what comes next. That was a big question, and honestly, I should have thought that through, and I didn't.
I want to talk about support coming from an unlikely place. So, for example, I mean, my wife is great at supporting me. She has her strengths. She doesn't know how to, what I do for a living, she understands, but she can't say, okay, well, here's how we should market this, or here's what you should do next. She's great at the back end stuff, like hey, here's the books, here's how much money we have, here's how much we don't. But support from unlikely places, one of your most unlikely places was Glenn Beck.
Yeah. Well, he found the book on Amazon, which was crazy, and I fell in love with it. I mean, I owe Glenn a huge debt of gratitude for everything he's done for me. I mean, he catapulted my career to another level, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
And he's actually done, I mean, the Glenn Beck that we saw years ago versus the Glenn Beck we're seeing now. I mean, Andrew WK, he had a great praise for him as well, and kind of, it's just, again, that versioning, right? That idea of evolving and versioning and saying, hey, what? Not just what am I going to get out of this, but what am I going to give out of this? And I think that when I see and follow your work, and it's about giving of yourself as well as giving of the experience, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
One of the things I want to touch on before we wrap up is now the how. Okay, so we've talked about, a lot of the why and the what, but we've never really had a chance to look at, okay, you've got these things, you've got these balls in the air, these plates spinning. How do you spin them? First off, how do you decide which ones to spin? And then secondly, what processes do you have in place? Like, let's talk tools. What tools or processes do you have in place to make sure that they spin accordingly?
Well, I think, really what it comes down to is answering the fundamental question: what is the one key metric that drives everything, right? We talked about that briefly before we hit record. And for us, we sat down and we said, okay, Srini, what's the key thing that leads to everything else? And that's more listeners. And so that has really become the filter question, by which I filter every request, every activity, everything I do. I'm like, okay, if I do this, is it going to lead to more listeners? And if it doesn't, I'm like, why am I doing it? And of course, I think there's something to be said for creative projects that have no purpose, that are just fun to do. And that's absolutely a great thing. In fact, I think it actually takes the pressure off of you a little bit and gives, your work a bit more meaning. So that's really, I think, one is identifying the key metric. And I have absolutely fallen in love with this calendaring app called Timeful, which is great because it allows you to schedule your to-do list, which sounds, like what's the big deal? But what it's interesting is it starts to memorize your patterns based on what you're scheduling. And then it starts to make suggestions for the next day and the next day and the next day. And I'll give you an example. One thing that I've never been able to do is develop a meditation habit. And, I've realized lately that was really important. It was pretty much core across the board to almost any really successful person that I'd interviewed. And so I started scheduling it at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there's a lot of proof that when you schedule things on your calendar, things that you're supposed to do, you're way more likely to do them. And what's amazing is I'm using this app and I'm flying through a to-do list. I get up at 7 and I'm done by 10:30 or 11 in the morning with all the most important things that I need to do. And that includes stuff that, like reading. If I want to read, I schedule 30 minutes to read. I schedule time to write my 1,000 words. I schedule time to meditate. And I found that these habits are just starting to become part of my life because of scheduling. I mean, given the people that listen to this show, I think that probably be one of the most useful things I could offer.
Yeah, Timeful, I've played with it quite a bit. I think that it plays a really useful role for when, like you said, if I'm trying to make sure I knock things out, like I'm working on my Workflow Warrior course, or I'm trying to meditate or exercise, that's where that stuff needs to go in the calendar, because at first blush, you put in your task manager, it just sits there amongst all the other lists, right? Everything else that's on the list. Then eventually, if it just blends in. Whereas if you have as on your calendar, whatever is there, it's that commitment. Patrick Roan's talked about like it's a wish until it's on a calendar. And I think that's a great way. And Timeful, I love how it kind of gets to know your patterns and says, hey, here's where I think we should slot this thing, which I think is fantastic. So, I mean, again, the technology, if we use the human approach towards the technology, say, hey, how can we leverage the technology to help us, as opposed to, hey, let's let the technology guide us, or rule us rather than guide us. That's when we run into problems. That's when we get stuck in this wheel of doing productive instead of actually being productive.
Yeah, no doubt. And I love Timeful because, Dan Ariely is the founder and he's a behavioral scientist. So like there's got to be some fascinating, thought process behind how it was put together.
Absolutely. Well, let's wrap things up here, but I want to give you a chance to tell everybody that's listening where people can find you and what's next on the horizon for Srini, and, everything that's going on with Unmistakable.
Yeah. Well, you can find me at unmistakablecreative.com. That's the podcast. You can subscribe in iTunes. The other thing that I would plug is Instigator Experience, and you can learn more about it at theinstigatorexperience.com. Other than that, I mean, really, we're working to put all the puzzle pieces together to really get this whole thing to the next level. I think that, as I'd said to you before we hit record, where I see things going is that Unmistakable will become sort of a cross-cultural mainstream phenomenon. At least that's my vision for it. And really one of those things that millions of people around the world are listening to.
See, there you go. Take that and your Jets ownership, Gary Vaynerchuk. Srini, thanks so much for joining me this week on the Productivityist podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this Flashback Friday episode. If you don't want to miss any more of these episodes, become a subscriber to the podcast. You can check out all the show notes related to this episode at mikevardy.com/podcast554, but you can also get it wherever you get your podcasts, which might be Spotify, where you can comment as well, or on Apple Podcasts, or even on YouTube. And while you are looking at any of those apps that you are using right now to listen to the show, subscribe to the show. It helps support the show, and it also means you won't miss a single episode of what's to come, which includes shiny new episodes every week, which also includes the monthly series PM Talks with my good friend Patrick Roan, of course, as well as these Flashback Friday episodes that we bring to you every week. Another way to support the show is to check out the sponsors you heard during the conversation today. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors to learn more about them. Click on any of those that resonated with you, and that way they know that we sent you. That's it for this episode. Until next time, where I bring you a shiny new episode of the podcast, I'm Mike Vardy, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.